Hi guys, Olive here today to tell you about all the books that I read in June of 2019. Like always, I will start off by talking about all those books that I have not discussed anywhere else, and then I'll move into talking about the books that I have discussed elsewhere. The first book that I'd like to talk to you about is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. This was 2018's Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction, and I was intrigued by this book only partially because it won. I'm generally not the biggest fan of book prizes, but I had read a previous book of Andrew Sean Greer's called The Impossible Lives of Greta Wells, and I found it to be really accomplished, so I was really interested to see what this book would be like. This book is about a middle-aged novelist named Arthur Less, who's in a little bit of a rut. His new novel is not well received by his publisher, and his lover, a young man he'd been seeing for years, decides to exit their relationship in order to marry a man more within his own age group. To escape this hard truth and to avoid going to the wedding, Less decides to accept every other invitation that crosses his, or in one case, someone else's desk. He wants to be anywhere but here and get his mind off of what he's about to lose. There's a lot of pressure on this character then, since he's our almost singular focus throughout the entire book. But I found that Less can stand up to this pressure. He is such a simultaneously frustrating but intriguing character. He is charmingly oblivious, and yet it's so easy to root for him. The book itself is basically just a romp around the world, watching Less get into a bunch of different shenanigans as he attempts to run away from his sadness. But it's a really sweet book. It has a lot of great plays on words and a lot of great comedic moments. I thought it was really well done. Was it good enough to win the Pulitzer? I am completely the wrong person to be asking that question because I have no idea what they even look for. But is it worth your time to read? I think so. I certainly liked it more than what became my complete failure of a 5-star nonfiction prediction this month, which was The Secret Life of Cows by Rosamund Young. I really thought I was going to love this. I lived on a farm very briefly during my childhood and befriended all the animals who lived there, including the cows. And so I thought that this account of a woman who runs an organic farm and interacts with all the cows that live on it would earn an easy 5 stars from me. Not so much. Don't get me wrong, it had its good moments. It aims to showcase the often disregarded depth to cows and the fact that they all have individual personalities. But how it read was like a cow reality television show and inspired some of the same confusion that is often generated by reading Russian novels. Rosamund Young has been working on this farm for decades, so she has interacted with her fair share of cows, so as you can imagine, she has many stories about them. The problem with this book, though, is that it is nearly entirely composed of anecdotes, and she assumes that you can keep up with all the different names of the cows, which sometimes generate nicknames, so you have to know those names in addition to the original names. Sometimes offspring of these cows are given the same name. This is why I said before that it can generate the same confusion as a Russian novel, because you would see another name on the page and you'd be thinking, wait, which cow is this now? Have we met him before? And who's he related to? I swear I need a bovine family tree just to keep up. The stories she tells are great for their content because cows are really remarkable and are such characters. But there is absolutely no finesse in the storytelling. I know I'm completely spoiled by all the different literary memoirs that I read, but I need a beautiful turn of phrase here and there. I just need it. So this book ended up being a 3-star read instead of the 5-star read that I predicted. But if you're interested in reading this book, I'd like to offer you a piece of advice. Please get this book out of the library versus paying full price for the hardcover, because they want $23 for this tiny book that is a reprint of previously published work just because they made the crappy decision to make this a hardcover instead of a paperback. Another book I read this month that I felt was a little bit different than advertised was called 9 Pints, A Journey Through the Money, Medicine, and Mysteries of Blood by Rose George. This was a daily deal on Audible that I could not resist picking up since medical nonfiction has really gotten my blood pumping lately. I am so sorry. I feel like this book was marketed as kind of a natural history of blood, what we know about it scientifically, and then its place in medicine. But as the book went on, it became clearer and clearer that this is a public health book. It starts off with a history of blood donation and transfusion in the UK, and then moves on to cover other topics, such as the factor medication given to hemophiliacs, which a lot of people contracted hepatitis from since it is a blood-derived product. And then it also talks about HIV, its spread, its preventions, and the current treatments for it. It's not that all of that isn't interesting. It definitely is. It's just so far removed from what I expected from this book. I tend to not like books that are marketed around a central linking topic. So like At Home, A Short History of Private Life by Bill Bryson, it's marketed as though it's a history of domestic life, when really it's just a bunch of somewhat interrelated histories of things relating to private life. And this book was marketed much the same. It's about public health issues relating to blood in some way. It's much less about blood itself. So why market it that way? I personally would have much preferred if this book's title was something along the lines of Life's Blood, How Our Most Precious Liquid Threatens Us as It Sustains Us. Something to indicate that this book is much more about health than it is about the substance itself. So if you're into public health, if that's your field of study or if it's one of your interests, then I think you should give this book a try. But if you're looking for a natural history, as I was, it's probably not for you. And then the random book off of my TBR that my patrons kindly chose for me this month was A Natural History of Beer by Rob DeSalle and Ian Tattersall. And I am sure this book won the poll, because I make no secret of the fact that I enjoy a good beer, especially if it's craft beer. I was really excited about this book. I've read books on beer before, but never about the natural and cultural history of it. But this ended up being a little bit of a weird experience. Like 9 Pints, I felt that this one had a little bit of a misleading title as well. It had a really strong start with discussing how and why humans first started co-opting fermentation for our own purposes, mainly for crop preservation and for the creation of a safe drinking liquid. But I feel like this book should have been titled The Science of Beer, because this book very quickly became hard science on beer. Like, hard science. It talks about beer's chemical makeup. It talks about the biology of a hop flower. It discusses the science of how our senses interpret a beer in front of us. Even as a lover of science, it was a bit much for me. If you are hardcore into beer and are cool with all that science being thrown at you, then I absolutely recommend this because it is extremely well written. But I'm just a simple lover of beer and I'm a layman when it comes to the science, so it does not have my sticker of approachability. And then I did my yearly reread of my very favorite novel, Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. This is a historical fiction novel set in 1938 New York City. This book starts off with a chance meeting between 3 characters. There's our main character, Katie Content, who's the daughter of Russian immigrants. She's at a bar with her best friend, Evelyn Ross, who is a stunning Midwesterner, and they run into a handsome, charming, and clearly rich stranger named Tinker Gray. This one meeting sets the wheels of the rest of this book in motion. And it ends up being kind of a grander statement about how a chance occurrence can be a determining factor in that entire year, and how that one year can be pivotal in shaping the life path ahead of you. I should probably at some point do a full review on this book. My reluctance to do so up to this point is mainly because this book is so personal to me. Despite me doing this YouTube thing, I'm actually a very intensely private person, and not in a I'm trying to keep people out kind of way, but more like I place a lot of value on my inner world. And I feel like to divulge all the ways that this book speaks to me would be opening myself up a little bit more than I currently feel comfortable with. But let me just say that there's so much wisdom in here. There are so many small observations about life and forging one's own path and choosing what we find value in. It's just a really, really precious book to me. It's the only book that I take comfort in rereading. And I have had some really, truly awful days where all I want to do is download the audiobook of this and get lost in it right then and there. But I choose to limit myself to this one reread per year because I feel like it's important to just this one time per year sit with this book and sit with the way it makes me think about the path my own life is taking. As of right now, this is not a book I can talk about in my typical analytical recommend it, don't recommend it kind of way. Because while I'm happy when other people pick up this book and enjoy it, I honestly wouldn't care if every other person on earth hated it. This book is personal to me. This book is my compass, and I recalibrate my life with it every year. That's enough gushing for now. Let's move on to talk about all the books that I have previously discussed elsewhere. The first one I talked about in my wrap-up for my 10 most popular books on my TBR project. That was The Magicians by Lev Grossman. I'm not going to say much about this because I was thoroughly unimpressed. It's basically about a guy who's swept away to a magical school almost immediately. It is atrociously paced. We get some focused sections on the early school years, and then the author hits fast forward kind of out of nowhere, and suddenly they're like ready to graduate. The author is just trying so hard in this book. He's trying to make this be edgy and flippant, I guess, to mimic the teenage years, but it really just looks sad in the process. And he's also constantly referencing Harry Potter, which this series is compared to. Breaking the fourth wall like that is just an ego stroke, and I'm not into it. I've heard that the second two books in this trilogy are better. Maybe at some point I will care about that, but I'm not at that point right now. And then I did 2 reviews for Open Letters Review this month, including a review of The Paper Wasp by Lauren Acampora. This is a new literary fiction release all about a rekindled female friendship between a Hollywood starlet and her middle school best friend. This friendship ends up developing into something very obsessive and mildly parasitic, and this entire book has a scarily unstable main character. The atmosphere of this book was downright eerie, and it definitely pulled me along, but I felt like the author wanted to do something like Marisha Pessl did in Night Film with that horror director. She wanted to create a cult of personality around one of the main characters in this book, and never quite achieved what she was aiming for. I can recommend this book if you want an unsettling, fast-paced read, since it definitely does have its strengths, but I do feel that it fell short in certain ways. I will link down below to my full written review if you'd like to hear more about it. And then the other book I wrote about this month actually ended up on my favorite books of the year so far list. That book is called Rough Magic: Riding the World's Loneliest Horse Race by Laura Pryor Palmer. This is a memoir coming-of-age combo in which our author elegantly details her impulsive decision to participate in the Mongol Derby, which is the world's most challenging horse race. Riders tear across 1,000 kilometers of the Mongolian steppe, ostensibly recreating Genghis Khan's postal system. They advertise this book as being for fans of H is for Hawk, and I have to echo that sentiment, because in a very similar way that Helen MacDonald did, the author of this book takes you through a defining and challenging experience in her life, while also forging relationships with unpredictable animals. And then there must have been something in the water during the month of June, because 2 more books that I read in June made it onto my top books of the year so far list. One of those you've definitely heard of before. That's Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I buddy read this book with the wonderful Roxanne over at the Novel Sanctuary. This book has been a lot more divisive than The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I've heard some rumblings that people are frustrated because it does have a somewhat similar setup to Evelyn Hugo, but it's told via interview formats. It's kind of like an oral history of this band's rise to prominence and also their downfall in the 1970s. I had expressed hope in my TBR video that this book would read kind of like a VH1 Behind the Music episode, which it totally did, and I was so happy about that. Generally speaking, I thought this book was a ton of fun. I'll have to go back and watch some negative reviews from people I trust and see why they didn't like it. I'm really and truly hoping that the negative feedback about this book doesn't have anything to do with Daisy and Billy being unlikable or unrelatable, since these are rock stars. They have egos and are definitely on drugs. I am personally not the kind of reader who goes into an experience looking for someone relatable on the page, someone who I could be friends with. And I think sometimes that's how other readers go into it. When these people have substance abuse issues, I don't know how anyone would look at Daisy Jones and think, yes, we could be close. But that doesn't mean she's not a compelling character. It doesn't mean she's not interesting. It doesn't mean her story is not worth telling. There are lots of different types of people in this world, and we shouldn't be limiting characters to just those personality traits that everyone finds the most attractive. But a fault I did find in this book was with the character of Eddie, the guitarist who got really upset that Billy was taking so much creative control over the band. He had a lot of anger toward Billy because he felt as though his voice wasn't being heard. And I don't believe for even 1 second that that anger wouldn't have also been directed at Daisy. It's just so unrealistic and not in line with the way the emotion of anger works. No one singularly focuses their anger at any one person. Anger kind of boils over and explodes out at everyone. And of course it would also be taken out at Daisy, who joins the band around the time he starts having problems. There is no way he would be able to divorce those two things in his mind. I also did find it to be a great injustice that I could not listen to the songs discussed in this book. They sound fantastic and I just want to listen to them. I was able to find a sort of substitute in this great indie band I was listening to around the time that I was reading this book. It is a little bit more 60s than it is 70s, but it is so summery and fun to listen to. I happen to know the lead singer many years ago. No idea if she would remember me, but I will link her band's information down below if you'd like to give it a listen. And then lastly, I was super impressed by The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. It was my pick off of my Classics TBR and tells the tale of the downfall of a beautiful, high-born woman in early 20th century New York City. I'm really hesitant to say anything more about this book because I am seriously right in the middle of planning an in-depth analysis video all about it. It's going to be juicy and I hope to have it up very soon. So those are all the books that I read during the month of June. Some really high highs, some really low lows, and some things in between. I'd love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard about any of them, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them. You can put that or any other comments or questions you may have in the comment section below, or if you'd like to chat with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!